Korean Mafia boss Lee Gwon-ho has just turned his engagement party into a crime scene without firing a single shot. The room is deathly silent as he grips his fiancée's jaw, forcing the rim of a poisoned wine glass against her teeth. "You knew," he whispers, his voice cutting through the elite crowd like a blade. Just seconds ago, a waitress named Ariana screamed the warning that saved his life, but the Korean Mafia boss isn't interested in being saved. He's interested in the truth. While his fiancée collapses from the sheer psychological weight of her exposure, Gwon-ho's eyes aren't on his dying relationship. They are locked on Ariana. She isn't shaking. She isn't crying. She's watching him with a cold, terrifying familiarity. In that moment, the Korean Mafia boss realizes the waitress didn't just notice the poison, she planted the doubt. Ariana is a ghost from a massacre he buried 20 years ago, a woman with no records, no fear, and a plan that goes far deeper than a tainted drink. He thinks he's the predator, but as the doors lock, the Korean Mafia boss realizes he's just invited his executioner to the head of the table. The crystal chandelier above the banquet table shivered as the echoes of Ariana's scream died down. For a moment, the wealthiest people in Seoul were frozen, their laughter cut short by the sheer audacity of a waitress. Lee Gwon-ho, the Korean Mafia boss, did not move a muscle. His hand remained wrapped around the stem of the wine glass, the dark red liquid inside as still as a deep pool of blood. "Don't drink that," Gwon-ho repeated, his voice a low, dangerous purr that made the air in the room turn cold. Beside him, his fiancée, Ji-woo, let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle. She reached for his arm, her diamonds glittering under the lights. "Gwon-ho, darling, ignore her. She's clearly just looking for attention. Let's finish our toast." The guests began to chuckle again, the tension breaking like thin ice. They expected Gwon-ho to have the woman dragged out. But the Korean Mafia boss wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at the way Ji-woo's pulse was hammering against the skin of her throat. He saw the tiny beads of sweat on her upper lip. He didn't set the glass down. Instead, he turned toward his beautiful fiancée with a smile that felt like a predator's warning. "You're right, my love. A toast to our future." He moved with a grace that was too fast to stop, his hand reaching out to cup Ji-woo's jaw in a firm, iron grip. "But since you're so eager to celebrate, you should take the first sip." The room went silent. Ji-woo's eyes widened, her pupils shrinking into tiny pinpricks of terror. "Gwon-ho. I'm not thirsty," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Drink," the Korean Mafia boss commanded. It wasn't a request, it was a death sentence. He pressed the rim of the crystal glass against her lips. The sound of the glass clinking against her teeth was the only noise in the massive hall. With a soft sob, Ji-woo took a tiny sip. Seconds later, the glass shattered on the marble floor. Ji-woo clutched her throat, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She didn't scream, she simply collapsed into her chair, her body going limp as she slipped to the floor in a heap of white silk and lace. Chaos erupted. Men shouted for doctors, and security swarmed the room. But Gwon-ho didn't look at the woman he was supposed to marry. He slowly turned his head toward the back of the room, where Ariana stood. She wasn't running. She wasn't terrified like the other staff. She stood perfectly still, her dark eyes meeting his with a defiance that no ordinary waitress should possess. The Korean Mafia boss felt a jolt of recognition that was sharper than any blade. He knew those eyes. He had seen them 20 years ago, through the smoke and fire of a night he thought he had erased. Within minutes, the banquet hall had transformed into a fortress. Doctors in white coats hurried through the gold-trimmed doors, their faces pale as they worked on Ji-woo's limp body. The diagnosis was delivered in a hushed, terrified whisper. The wine was laced with a rare neurotoxin. It wouldn't kill her today, but the message was clear. Ji-woo was alive, but the mask of the perfect fiancée had been shattered forever. She She was no longer a bride, she was a suspect. Lee Gwon-ho, the Korean Mafia boss, stood in the center of the chaos like the eye of a storm. He didn't look at his shivering fiancée as she was carried away on a stretcher. His mind was already miles away, locked on the waitress who had seen through the shadow of the glass. "Bring her to my private study," Gwon-ho ordered, his voice cold enough to frost the glass walls. "No one else enters. Not even my shadows." The study was a room of dark wood and heavy silence. Ariana sat in a leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look like a girl who had just witnessed a poisoning. She looked like she was waiting for a bus. Gwon-ho paced the floor, his heavy footsteps the only sound in the room. He stopped directly in front of her, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. The scent of expensive cologne and danger rolled off him. "You have 10 seconds to tell me the truth," the Korean Mafia boss said, his eyes narrowing into lethal slits. "How did you know?" "My best security team missed it. My tasters missed it." Yet a girl serving drinks from the back of the room saw death in a crystal glass. "Talk." Ariana looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "It was just instinct, sir," she said softly. "The way the light hit the liquid, it didn't look right. I acted before I could think." Gwon-ho let out a short, dark laugh. He reached out and grabbed the arm of her chair, pinning her in place. "Instinct? I don't believe in instinct. I believe in training. I believe in spies. And I believe that coincidences are just lies that people haven't figured out yet." He leaned closer, searching her face for a flinch, a blink, or a bead of sweat. There was nothing. "You didn't look surprised when she fell. You looked satisfied." Ariana didn't pull away. "Maybe I just don't like seeing people get what they don't deserve." The Korean Mafia boss stood up straight, a chill running down his spine. He knew that tone. He signaled to his head of security, who was waiting behind the double doors. "Take her to the holding wing," he commanded. Then, he turned to his lead hacker, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I want everything. Every school she attended, every hospital she visited, every person she ever spoke to. Dig into the dark web if you have to. If this girl is a ghost, I want to know who buried her." The heavy rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lee Gwon-ho's penthouse, mirroring the storm brewing inside his mind. The Korean Mafia boss stood before a wall of glowing blue monitors, his eyes fixed on a blinking red cursor. For the first time in his career, his resources had hit a brick wall. "Explain this to me again," Gwon-ho said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble. His lead hacker, a man who could break into government databases in minutes, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sir, it's not that we can't find her records. It's that they don't exist. There is no birth certificate for an Ariana matching her description. No school transcripts, no tax filings, no social media. She hasn't even used a cell phone in this city until 3 months ago." The Korean Mafia boss turned away from the screens, his brow furrowed. "Everyone leaves a footprint. Even a ghost leaves a shadow. Did you check the facial recognition?" "We did," the hacker replied, his voice trembling. "We ran her face through every CCTV camera in Seoul, every airport, every train station. She first appears on camera 90 days ago, walking out of a blind spot in an alleyway. It's like she stepped out of thin air. There is no history of her traveling into the country. No visa, no passport. Nothing." Gwon-ho walked toward the window, looking down at the flickering lights of the city. He thought about the way Ariana had looked at him in the study, unflinching, cold, and strangely knowing. An ordinary waitress would be screaming for a lawyer or crying in fear. But Ariana was sitting in her cell, staring at the wall as if she already knew exactly what his hackers would find. He began to realize this wasn't just a girl who had stumbled into his life. She was a puzzle specifically designed for him to solve. The silence in the room grew heavy as the Korean Mafia boss processed the impossible truth. In a world where every movement is tracked and every person is logged into a system, Ariana was a total black hole. Suddenly, a notification chirped on the main console. The hacker's eyes widened as a new window popped up, showing a military-grade encryption screen. Wait. Sir, look at this. I found a tiny fragment of a file in the deep web. It was buried under layers of high-level government protection. Gwon-ho leaned in, his heart tightening. The file was mostly empty, but at the very bottom, there was a timestamp and a single command line, data purge successful. She didn't just forget her past, the Korean Mafia boss whispered, a chill of realization hitting him. Someone powerful went through the trouble of erasing her entire existence from the world. And there is only one reason to do that. He looked back at the screen, his face hardening. They were hiding her from me. The air in the private hospital wing was thick with the smell of antiseptic and expensive flowers. Ji-woo sat upright in her bed, her face pale and her hands trembling as she clutched a silk blanket. When the door opened and Lee Gwon-ho walked in, she flinched. The Korean Mafia boss didn't say a word. He simply pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down, his dark eyes watching her like a hawk watching a wounded bird. Gwon-ho, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know the wine was poisoned. The Korean Mafia boss leaned forward, his face an unreadable mask. The doctors found the toxin, Ji-woo. But my hackers found something else. They found a series of encrypted messages sent from your father's estate to a rival syndicate. You've been keeping secrets from me. Ji-woo broke down, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. My father, he forced me. Our family business was failing, and the rival syndicate offered to pay off our debts if I just gave them information about your schedule. I only told them small things. I never wanted you to die. I love you, Gwon-ho. You have to believe me. I drank that wine because I thought if I showed you I was loyal, you would never find out about my father's ties. She reached out to grab his hand, her voice desperate. I was a pawn, just like that waitress. Please, forgive me. I'll do anything to make it right. Gwon-ho looked at her hand on his, then slowly looked back up at her face. To her surprise, his expression softened. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. I understand, Ji-woo. Family is a heavy burden. I can forgive a mistake made out of fear, as long as it never happens again. Ji-woo let out a long breath of relief, her shoulders sagging. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Gwon-ho. Rest now, the Korean Mafia boss said softly, standing up to leave. We will move past this together. But as he walked out of the room and closed the heavy door, the warmth vanished from his eyes. He pulled his phone from his pocket and signaled his lead guard. She thinks I believe her, he said, his voice cold and flat. She claims she only gave them small things, but I want her watched every second. I've planted a bug in the locket I gave her this morning. If she makes one call to her father or the rival syndicate, I want to know immediately. The Korean Mafia boss walked down the hallway, his mind already shifting back to Ariana. He wasn't just testing his fiancée's heart, he was setting a trap to see if her betrayal was the reason Ariana had appeared in the first place. Gwon-ho returned to the holding wing, his mind heavy with the weight of his fiancée's lies. He found Ariana sitting in the exact same position as before. She didn't look tired or afraid. She looked like she was counting the seconds. As the Korean Mafia boss entered the room, she didn't wait for him to speak. You should move your car from the underground garage, she said, her voice calm and steady. The third pillar from the entrance has a hairline crack that wasn't there yesterday. By midnight, your security team will be distracted by a fire alarm in the West Wing. That's when they'll do it. Gwon-ho stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. How could you possibly know my security protocols? My men change those patterns every 6 hours. Ariana tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the room. You like patterns, Lee Gwon-ho. You've liked them since you were 8 years old, hiding in the crawlspace of your father's old house while the men in black suits searched for you. You count the steps between doors. You always sit with your back to the wall, and you never use the same elevator twice in one day. You think these habits keep you safe, but they actually make you a target for anyone who knows the boy you used to be. The Korean Mafia boss felt a chill crawl up his spine. The story of the crawlspace was something he had never told a soul. It was a memory buried under years of blood and power. To hear a stranger speak of it was like having his chest cut open in public. He stepped closer, slamming his hand against the wall beside her head. Who are you? He hissed, his face inches from hers. My fiancé is a traitor, my hackers can't find your name, and now you're reciting my childhood nightmares like a bedtime story. No waitress has this kind of information. Only an insider, someone who grew up in the shadow of my family, could know these things. Ariana didn't flinch. She leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin. I know that you still keep your mother's broken watch in a safe behind the painting in your bedroom. I know that you hate the smell of lilies because they remind you of her funeral. I know everything the world forgot about you. Gwon-ho's hand trembled with a mix of rage and genuine fear. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his voice a desperate whisper. Who taught you about me? Who gave you these secrets? Ariana's lips curled into a sad, knowing smile. Someone you tried to erase, she replied. But some memories, Lee Gwon-ho, refused to stay dead. The words, someone you tried to erase, echoed in Gwon-ho's mind, pulling him into a dark memory he had kept locked away for 2 decades. Suddenly, the sterile walls of the holding wing vanished, replaced by the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling timber. 20 years ago, a small village on the outskirts of Busan had burned. It was a place the world wanted to forget, a quiet settlement caught in the crossfire of a brutal power struggle. Gwon-ho remembered the orange glow of the sky and the way the ash fell like black snow. His father's syndicate had been blamed for the massacre. The orders had been simple, leave no witnesses. By morning, the village was a graveyard of charcoal and bone. Amidst the chaos, a young girl had vanished into the woods. She was the only one who had escaped the fire, a tiny shadow lost to the night. For years, the story of the Ghost of Busan had haunted the syndicate's history, a stain on their reputation that Gwon-ho had tried to bury under his own rise to power. Gwon-ho snapped back to the present, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He looked at Ariana, really looked at her, and saw the faint, jagged scar peeking out from under the collar of her waitress uniform. It was a burn mark, aged and faded, but unmistakable. The village, the Korean Mafia boss whispered, his voice cracking with a rare moment of vulnerability. You were the girl from the fire. You're the witness they said didn't exist. Ariana nodded slowly. My family died that night because of a signature your father put on a piece of paper. I spent 20 years living as a ghost, watching you build your empire on the ashes of my home. Gwon-ho stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side, though he didn't draw it. His mind raced through the possibilities. If she was that girl, she had every reason to be the one who poisoned the wine. She had every reason to want him dead in the most painful way possible. So, this is it, the Korean Mafia boss asked, his eyes narrowing as he braced himself for her move. You waited 20 years to get close enough to finish what the fire started? You're here for revenge. Ariana stood up for the first time, her presence filling the small room with an unexpected dignity. She didn't look like an assassin. She looked like a judge. You're wrong, Lee Gwon-ho. If I wanted you dead, I would have let you drink that wine. I didn't come here to take your life. She took a step toward him, her gaze unwavering. I came because the people who burned my village are the same people sitting at your table today. I didn't come for revenge. I came for the truth. The Korean Mafia boss felt the room spinning as the pieces of the puzzle began to shift into a terrifying new shape. He looked at the shattered remains of the wine glass still staining the floor of the banquet hall through the security monitors. He had assumed the attack was aimed at his throne, but Ariana's calm confession changed everything. He called his lead chemist back into the room. "The toxin," Gwon-ho said, his voice sharp and urgent. "Tell me exactly how it works." The chemist adjusted his glasses, looking nervous. "Sir, it is a very specific dose. It acts quickly on anyone with a smaller body mass. For someone of your size and weight, it might have caused a few hours of sickness. But for someone smaller, like a woman or a young girl, it would have caused an immediate, silent heart failure." Gwon-ho's blood turned to ice. He looked at Ariana, who was still standing by the window. He realized then that he was the one who usually handed his first glass of the night to the staff as a sign of generosity before the toast. It was a well-known habit of his. The poisoner wasn't trying to kill the boss, they were counting on him handing that specific glass to the new waitress. "They weren't aiming for me," Gwon-ho whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "They were trying to kill you before you could say a single word to me." Someone powerful knew exactly who Ariana was. Someone from that night 20 years ago was still in his inner circle, and they were terrified of what she remembered. They didn't just want her dead, they wanted her silenced in a way that looked like a mistake. The Korean Mafia boss felt a surge of cold fury. He had spent his life being the one who controlled the pieces on the board, but someone had used his own banquet to try and commit a murder under his nose. He grabbed his radio and barked an order that echoed through every speaker in the building. "Assemble the board. Every captain, every advisor, and every guest still in the building. Now." 10 minutes later, the elite of the underworld stood in the lobby, whispering in fear. Gwon-ho walked onto the grand balcony, looking down at them. He reached out and pulled Ariana to his side, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder. The crowd gasped. A waitress standing beside the boss was unheard of. "Listen well," the Korean Mafia boss announced, his voice booming through the hall. "There is a shadow among us who thinks they can strike at my guests. This woman is no longer a servant. From this moment forward, Ariana is under my personal protection. Anyone who breathes in her direction without my permission will answer to me." The silence that followed was heavy with shock. The underworld had expected a funeral for a fiancé, but instead, they were witnessing the rise of a ghost. In the days following the public declaration, the atmosphere inside the syndicate's mansion shifted from fear to a suffocating tension. Ji-woo watched from the shadows of the upper balcony, her heart twisting with a mixture of jealousy and pure, cold terror. She was supposed to be the future queen, the woman everyone bowed to, but now she was ignored. While she recovered in her room, the Korean Mafia boss was spending his hours in the library with a waitress. She could see them through the cracked door. Gwon-ho wasn't shouting or demanding answers. He was listening. For the first time in his life, Lee Gwon-ho felt the heavy weight of the throne he sat upon. In the quiet of the night, he and Ariana sat across from each other, the only sound being the ticking of a clock. As she spoke about the life she had lived in hiding, Gwon-ho saw the depth of her pain. He saw the girl who had to sleep with one eye open for 20 years. But as Ariana looked at him, she didn't see a monster. She saw the flickers of guilt in his eyes every time he looked at her faded burn scar. She realized that the boss of the most feared syndicate in Seoul was haunted by the same fire that had destroyed her world. "You didn't know, did you?" Ariana asked softly one evening. "About the order my family was killed for?" Gwon-ho looked down at his hands, his voice barely a whisper. "I was told it was a rebel hideout. I was told there were no innocents. I spent my life believing a lie that helped me sleep at night. This budding trust was a poison of its own to Ji-woo. She felt the walls closing in. If Ariana stayed, Gwon-ho would eventually find out everything about Ji-woo's father and their true involvement in the massacre. She realized that Gwon-ho's protection of Ariana was a death sentence for her own family. Her love for him was being replaced by the sharp instinct to survive. Driven by a desperate need to reclaim her place, Ji-woo waited until the dead of night. She crept into the bathroom and pulled a small, silver burner phone from a hidden panel behind the mirror. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number she had memorized since childhood. "Father," she whispered into the phone, her voice shaking with tears and rage. "He's moved her into the inner circle. He trusts her more than me. If you don't act now, she will tell him everything. She knows about the fire, and she knows who really gave the order." On the other end, the rival syndicate boss's voice was like ice. "Where is she now?" "She's in the East Wing," Ji-woo replied, her eyes hardening. "But you have to hurry. Gwon-ho is changing. If we don't kill the girl, he will destroy us all." The betrayal moved like a silent poison through the mansion's ventilation. While Lee Gwon-ho was in a high-level meeting, Ji-woo took her final step into the darkness. She disabled the security cameras in the East Wing for a 60-second window, a trick she had learned from watching the guards shift rotations. She whispered the gate codes into her hidden phone, sealing Ariana's fate with a single press of a button. In the quiet library, Ariana felt the shift in the air before she heard the footsteps. She didn't scream when the heavy doors swung open. She didn't fight when the masked men, wearing the insignias of the rival syndicate, surrounded her. She simply watched them with those haunting, calm eyes as they threw a black hood over her head and dragged her into the night. By the time Gwon-ho reached the East Wing, the silence was deafening. He had seen the red alert on his tablet, a notification that the East Wing sensors had been manually bypassed. His heart hammered against his ribs, a feeling of pure panic he hadn't felt since he was a child. He burst into the library, his eyes darting to the chair where Ariana usually sat. It was empty. A single book lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering in the draft from an open window. "Ariana," he roared, but only the wind answered. He found Ji-woo standing by the window, her face a mask of fake horror. "Gwon-ho. I saw them. Men in black, they took her through the gardens. I tried to stop them, but they were too fast. The Korean Mafia boss didn't even look at her. He didn't have to. He saw the smudge of dirt on her silk sleeve and the way she wouldn't meet his gaze. He realized the woman he had promised to marry had just handed his soul to his worst enemies. He raced to the courtyard, his boots skidding on the wet gravel, but all he saw were the vanishing taillights of a black van speeding through the perimeter gates. His phone buzzed in his hand. It was a video call from an unknown number. He swiped the screen, and his breath hitched. Ariana was tied to a chair in a dark, industrial warehouse. A man stood behind her, the shadow of a blade visible near her throat. But Ariana wasn't looking at the knife. She was looking directly into the camera, her expression so peaceful it was terrifying. "Gwon-ho," she said, her voice steady and clear through the speakers. She didn't sound like a victim. She sounded like she was finishing a conversation they had started days ago. "Don't blame yourself for being slow. I knew she would betray you the moment you chose me over her." The Korean Mafia boss gripped the phone so hard the screen began to crack. He had been so focused on protecting her from the past that he had forgotten the snake living under his own roof. The video feed flickered, but Ariana's gaze remained as steady as a mountain. Behind her, the rival syndicate guards looked confused. They had expected her to beg for mercy, but she sat in that cold warehouse like it was a throne room. The Korean Mafia boss watched from his screen, his knuckles white, his heart heavy with a guilt that threatened to swallow him whole. "Why are you so calm?" Gwon-ho rasped into the phone. "They will kill you, Ariana. I'm coming for you, but you have to fight." Ariana let out a soft, sad breath. I've been fighting since I was 5 years old, Gwon-ho. But I didn't let them capture me because I gave up. I let them take me because I needed to see if you would actually come. The rival guard stepped back as Ariana leaned toward the camera. I spent years dreaming of your death. I thought that if I destroyed the Korean Mafia boss, the world would be a better place. But then I realized that you were just a boy who had been lied to, just like I was a girl who had been robbed. My family didn't die because of your hate. They died because of the politics of men who treat lives like coins. Gwon-ho listened, the sounds of his men loading their cars in the background fading into a hum. I came to that banquet to see if the man leading the Dragon Syndicate was still that little boy in the crawlspace, she continued. I wanted to know, are you a monster who enjoys the blood, or are you a man trapped in a golden cage? If you had let Ji-woo die that night without a second thought, I would have ended you myself. But you chose to seek the truth. You chose to protect a ghost. The Korean Mafia boss felt a lump in his throat. You tested me. You risked your life just to see if I had a soul. I had to know if the kingdom was worth saving, Ariana whispered. Then, her voice turned sharp and lethal. The men holding me think I am a bargaining chip. They think I am a secret to be buried. But they don't know that I didn't come empty-handed. She looked at the shadow of the rival boss standing just out of frame. In the heels of the shoes I left in your library, Gwon-ho, there is a microchip. It contains 30 years of bank records, hidden contracts, and the real names of every person who ordered the fires 20 years ago. It doesn't just destroy your enemies. It has enough evidence to destroy every syndicate in this country, including yours. Gwon-ho gasped. She held the power to wipe his entire world off the map. The question isn't whether I can destroy you, Ariana said, her eyes burning with a new fire. The question is, now that you know the truth, will you help me burn the right people? The sirens of Seoul wailed in the distance, but the real war was happening inside the shadows of the syndicate's empire. Within hours of Ariana's revelation, the city exploded into chaos. News helicopters circled above, their searchlights cutting through the rain as headlines flashed across every screen, Mafia engagement ends in poisoning and kidnapping. The police were closing in, the media was screaming for blood, and the rival syndicate had decided that if they couldn't have the microchip, they would leave nothing but ashes behind. At the warehouse, the doors were kicked open, but it wasn't the police. It was Ji-woo's father, the rival boss, his face twisted in a mask of desperation. He didn't care about the law anymore. He walked toward Ariana with a heavy silence, his hand reaching for a weapon. To him, she wasn't a girl, she was a loose thread that could unravel 30 years of his lies. You should have stayed dead in that village, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. Just as he moved, the wall of the warehouse shuddered. Lee Gwon-ho stepped through the debris, but he wasn't wearing his expensive suit. He looked like a man who had walked through hell to get there. His own men had begged him to stay back, warning him that showing his face at a crime scene would end his career and send him to prison forever. But the Korean Mafia boss didn't care about his throne anymore. Step away from her, Gwon-ho said, his voice a low, terrifying growl that silenced the room. Ji-woo's father laughed, a cold, desperate sound. Look around you, Gwon-ho. The police are outside. The media is watching. If you walk over to her, you lose everything. Your money, your power, your name. You'll be nothing but a criminal in a cell. Give her to me, and we can still fix this. Gwon-ho didn't hesitate. He didn't look at the flashing blue lights reflecting against the windows or the cameras recording his every move. He walked straight past the rival boss and stood in front of Ariana, shielding her body with his own. He reached down and untied the ropes around her wrists, his touch surprisingly gentle. You're making a mistake, the rival boss screamed. You're burning your entire kingdom for a waitress. Gwon-ho turned his head slightly, his eyes hard and certain. He knew that by standing here, by choosing Ariana, he was signing the end of the Dragon Syndicate. He was giving up the only life he had ever known. But for the first time in 20 years, he could breathe. He looked at Ariana, who was watching him with wide, shocked eyes, and he felt the weight of the crown finally slip off his shoulders. The kingdom was built on lies and fire, the Korean Mafia boss said, his voice echoing through the hollow warehouse. If the world burns because of the truth, then let it burn with me. The sun rose over a city that would never be the same. The fall of the giants happened quickly. As the evidence from Ariana's microchip flooded the news, the rival syndicate crumbled under the weight of decades of crime. Ji-woo, once the sparkling diamond of Seoul's high society, was led away in handcuffs, her screams of protest ignored by the police. The empire that had been built on the ashes of a burned village was finally being dismantled by the truth. Lee Gwon-ho was no longer the feared Korean mafia boss of a criminal underworld. He had traded his throne for a chance at redemption. While he still held power, it was different now, cleaner, but heavier. The syndicate's old ways were being replaced by a strict new code. Beside him through every meeting and every difficult decision was Ariana. She was no longer a waitress or a ghost, she was his most trusted ally, the only person who dared to tell him the truth when everyone else lied. Yet, despite their bond, the air between them remained complex. Ariana had not forgotten the fire. She had not forgotten that the man she now worked with was the son of the man who had destroyed her life. She didn't offer him easy forgiveness, and Gwon-ho didn't ask for it. They lived in the space between shadows and light, bound together by a history that could never be erased. One evening, they stood together on the high balcony of his glass tower, overlooking the flickering lights of Seoul. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of the sea. Ariana looked out at the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "You destroyed my past, Lee Gwon-ho," she said softly. "Everything I was, every memory I had of home, ended because of your name." Gwon-ho turned to her, his face softer than it had ever been during his years as a Korean mafia boss. He didn't offer an excuse. He simply looked at the woman who had saved his soul by threatening to burn his world. "I know," he replied, his voice steady. "I can't give you back what you lost. But help me build a future that is worth living in. Help me make sure no other girl has to become a ghost." Ariana looked at him for a long moment. For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched her lips, though her eyes remained sharp. She stepped closer to the edge, the city lights reflecting in her dark gaze. "I'll stay," she said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. "But remember, Lee Gwon-ho. I didn't come to be your queen. I came to change your kingdom." Gwon-ho nodded, accepting the challenge. But as they stood in their moment of victory, thousands of miles away in a dark office in London, a computer screen flickered to life. A man in a tailored suit stared at a high-resolution photo of Gwon-ho and Ariana on the balcony. He picked up a pen and drew a red circle around Ariana's face. "The girl survived," the man whispered to the shadows. "It's time to finish what the fire started."